I sit in my car outside Meridian Financial Group at 6 in the morning, clutching a resignation letter I never got to submit. 20 minutes ago, I walked out of the most humiliating meeting of my life, carrying a folder that could destroy everything my former colleagues hold dear. My hands shake as I remember their sneering faces, the prepared termination papers, and manager Derek's cruel laughter. They called me a parasite. They thought I would crumble. Instead, I discovered their darkest secret and now hold the power to expose them all. 18 months ago, I arrived at Meridian Financial with stars in my eyes and a business degree from the University of Texas burning a hole in my pocket. Caroline Matthews, fresh graduate ready to conquer the world of corporate finance in downtown Chicago. The towering glass building reflected my ambitions perfectly, and when I learned our client portfolio was worth over $200 million, I knew I had landed somewhere extraordinary. My first day felt like stepping into a movie. The sleek marble lobby, the panoramic views from the 42nd floor, the hum of serious money being moved and managed. I wore my best navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio my grandmother had given me for graduation. Everything screamed professional success, and I was determined to earn my place among Chicago's financial elite. Derek Morrison. My senior manager gave me the grand tour. At 35, he commanded respect with his perfectly pressed suits and confident handshake. His corner office overlooked Grant Park, and he spoke about market trends with the authority of someone who had seen fortunes made and lost. Sandra Kellerman, the team lead, welcomed me with a warm smile and offered to show me the ropes. At 42, she exuded competence and maternal guidance that made me feel instantly comfortable. Jake Phillips, the fellow analyst closest to my age at 26, seemed like the perfect colleague and potential friend. Those early weeks flew by in a whirlwind of training sessions, client presentations, and late-night number crunching. I threw myself into every assignment determined to prove that hiring me was the smartest decision Meridian Financial had ever made. While other junior employees left at 5 sharp, I stayed until 8 or 9, perfecting spreadsheets and double-checking calculations until my eyes burned from staring at monitors. My specialty quickly emerged as forensic financial analysis. Where others saw neat columns of numbers, I spotted patterns, inconsistencies, and irregularities that told stories about where money really went. During my second month, I caught a calculation error that would have cost our client $40,000 in unnecessary tax payments. Derek praised my attention to detail publicly, and I felt like I belonged. But subtle changes began creeping into my daily experience. Lunch invitations became less frequent, then stopped entirely. When I approached groups of colleagues chatting by the coffee machine, conversations would pause awkwardly before shifting to safe topics like weather or weekend plans. I told myself this was normal adjustment period stuff, that building relationships took time in competitive environments. My contributions in client meetings started getting overlooked. I would present detailed analysis showing significant market opportunities only to watch Derek nod politely and move on to Sandra's more general observations. When clients asked follow-up questions about my research, Derek would answer himself, rarely crediting my work or inviting me to elaborate. The recognition I craved seemed always just out of reach. The isolation deepened as months passed. Jake, who had initially suggested grabbing drinks after work, became increasingly distant. Our conversations shrank to professional pleasantries about project deadlines and meeting schedules. Sandra's maternal warmth cooled into polite efficiency. Even the administrative assistants seemed to avoid prolonged eye contact when I passed their desks. I compensated by working even harder. 60-hour weeks became 70-hour weeks. I missed my brother Tommy's birthday party back in Nebraska, skipped my college roommate's wedding, and declined every social invitation that came my way. My apartment became a second office, scattered with financial reports and client files that I studied obsessively, searching for ways to add value and prove my worth. During routine quarterly reviews, I began noticing small discrepancies in client account statements. Numbers that should have matched across different reports showed variations of a few $1,000s here and there. When I brought these inconsistencies to Derek's attention, he brushed them off as timing differences between reporting periods or minor administrative adjustments that happened during month-end processing. Late-night meetings became more frequent, but I was never invited. I would work at my desk until 8 or 9, then noticed conference room lights still blazing at 10 or 11 when I finally headed home. The next morning, Derek and Sandra would reference decisions made in meetings I had not attended, strategies I had not helped develop, and client conversations I had not been part of. The first real warning sign came when I tried to access client files I had worked on just the week before. My system permissions had been quietly revoked, and when I asked Derek about it, he claimed it was a routine security update that would be resolved soon. But days turned into weeks, and my access remained limited to basic data entry tasks and general market research that any intern could handle. I started keeping detailed notes about these irregularities, not out of suspicion initially, but from professional habit. My notebook filled with questions about missing documentation, unexplained account transfers, and client meetings that happened without proper record keeping. The methodical part of my brain that had made me good at forensic analysis kept flagging these anomalies even though I tried to dismiss them as growing pains in a complex organization. Then came the conversation that changed everything. I was working late on a Thursday evening alone in the office, except for the cleaning crew, when I heard voices coming from Derek's office. The door was slightly ajar, and as I passed by to use the restroom, I caught fragments of discussion that made my blood run cold. Derek was talking to Sandra about something called the arrangement with offshore accounts. He mentioned specific dollar amounts that were significantly larger than anything I had seen in our official client reports. Sandra responded with account numbers I did not recognize and reference to weekend transfers that supposedly happened during times when our systems were offline for maintenance. I froze in the hallway, straining to hear more while trying to appear casual if anyone spotted me. They discussed client names I knew, but in contexts that made no sense based on the legitimate business I had been helping manage. When Derek mentioned moving funds to avoid detection during quarterly audits, I realized I was overhearing something that could destroy careers and land people in federal prison. The conversation ended abruptly when Sandra noticed the time and reminded Derek they needed to finish before the cleaning crew reached their floor. I quickly retreated to my desk, heart pounding, and pretended to be absorbed in spreadsheet work when they emerged from the office minutes later. Derek glanced in my direction with an expression I had never seen before, calculating and cold. The next morning, I tried to access the client files they had mentioned using the account numbers I had overheard. Every single file returned an access denied error. When I checked my system permissions, I discovered that my clearance level had been downgraded overnight to restrict access to exactly the types of records that would have helped me understand what Derek and Sandra were really discussing. Monday morning brought a shock that confirmed my worst fears about how dramatically my situation had deteriorated. I arrived at the office to find my desk had been moved over the weekend to an isolated corner far from the team I had worked with for over a year. My computer, phone, and filing cabinet had been relocated to a spot near the supply closet, away from the collaborative workspace where important decisions were made and crucial conversations happened naturally. The message was clear and humiliating. While I was excluded from the weekend planning session that had orchestrated this reorganization, my colleagues had deliberated about my physical separation from their daily operations. Derek explained this as optimization of workflow patterns, but everyone understood the real purpose: limiting my access to sensitive conversations and strategic discussions that might reveal information they preferred I not overhear. Jake Phillips, who had once grabbed coffee with me between meetings and shared harmless office gossip about client quirks and industry rumors, now offered only monosyllabic responses to my attempts at normal workplace interaction. When I asked about his weekend plans or mentioned interesting market developments, he would nod politely and find urgent reasons to return to his computer or attend meetings I was not invited to join. Sandra assigned me projects that felt deliberately designed to waste my analytical skills and professional education. Instead of the complex forensic financial analysis that had become my specialty, I received data entry assignments that required no critical thinking, filing tasks that any temporary employee could complete, and basic calculations that insulted my intelligence and training. My previous reputation for catching subtle irregularities that saved clients significant money seemed completely forgotten. Meanwhile, less experienced colleagues received the challenging assignments I had once handled. Amanda Rogers, hired just 3 months ago, with half my education and no relevant experience, was given responsibility for client portfolios I had developed deep expertise managing. When I offered to help with technical questions or provide background information about client preferences, Derek declined my assistance and suggested I focus on my assigned responsibilities. My performance review was suddenly scheduled 6 months ahead of the normal timeline, despite my previous evaluations being consistently excellent. The meeting invitation arrived with no explanation for the unusual timing, and when I asked Derek about it, he claimed the company was implementing new evaluation procedures that required more frequent feedback sessions. This explanation satisfied no one since other employees received no similar schedule changes. During lunch breaks, when I hoped to rebuild damaged relationships with colleagues, I noticed Derek taking phone calls behind his closed office door. His voice carried an urgency and tension that was completely different from his normal client conversations. Through the glass walls, I could see him pacing, gesturing emphatically, and occasionally looking toward the general work area where the rest of us sat. These conversations lasted much longer than typical business calls, sometimes stretching for 30 or 40 minutes. The financial irregularities that had initially caught my attention became impossible to ignore as I gained access to more pieces of the puzzle during my limited system interactions. Using public financial databases during my lunch hours, I cross-referenced company filings with the internal reports I could still access. The discrepancies were not minor timing differences or administrative adjustments, as Derek had claimed. They represented several $1 million that appeared in some records, but not others, following patterns that suggested deliberate concealment rather than innocent bookkeeping errors. My investigation revealed phantom transactions that occurred during weekend hours when the office was supposedly empty and systems were offline for maintenance. These transfers involved shell companies in the Cayman Islands with names that were similar to, but not identical with, our legitimate business partners. The sophistication of this arrangement indicated months or years of careful planning, not accidental mistakes or isolated incidents of poor record-keeping. The personal stakes of uncovering this information became increasingly urgent as my family situation deteriorated. Tommy, my younger brother, needed surgery to repair damage from a motorcycle accident that had left him with chronic pain and limited mobility. The medical bills were approaching $80,000, and our family's insurance covered only a fraction of the specialized treatment he required. I had promised to help with expenses, counting on the promotion and salary increase I had been working toward for over a year. My mother called me crying one evening, explaining that the bank had sent foreclosure notices for our family farm in Nebraska. Decades of careful farming and conservative financial management were being destroyed by a combination of drought equipment failures and medical expenses that had drained their savings. The farm represented 4 generations of family history, and losing it would devastate my parents emotionally and financially. These family crises made my professional situation even more desperate. The promotion I had been expecting would have provided the financial resources to help Tommy and save the farm. Instead, I was watching my career being systematically dismantled, while family members who depended on my success faced catastrophic consequences. The pressure to find answers and protect my livelihood became overwhelming. But the most terrifying discovery was yet to come. While reviewing documents I had legitimate access to, I found authorization forms bearing my digital signature for transactions I had never approved or even seen. These signatures appeared on transfer requests involving the same offshore accounts Derek and Sandra had discussed in their private conversation. The documents were dated during times when I was provably in other locations, including one weekend when I had visited family in Nebraska. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were not just excluding me from their criminal operation, they were setting me up to take responsibility for it. My digital credentials had been compromised, my signature had been forged, and my employment history was being manipulated to create a narrative where I would appear to be the mastermind behind whatever illegal scheme they were operating. I spent sleepless nights trying to understand how they had gained access to my digital signature and what other evidence they might be fabricating to support their frame-up. The sophisticated nature of the document forgery suggested they had help from someone with technical expertise, possibly from within our own IT department or from external criminal organizations. The web of deception was far more complex and dangerous than I had initially imagined. As I sat at my isolated desk watching Derek and Sandra conduct business as usual while planning my professional destruction, I realized that fighting back would require evidence, courage, and a level of strategic thinking I had never needed before. They had chosen the wrong person to underestimate. My forensic analysis skills, attention to detail, and determination to protect my family would become the tools I needed to expose their crimes and save my own life from the disaster they were orchestrating. The anonymous note appeared in my desk drawer on a Tuesday morning, written in block letters on plain white paper. Stop digging or face consequences. Final warning. My hands trembled as I read those words, realizing that my quiet investigation had not gone unnoticed. Someone was watching my every move, monitoring my computer access, and tracking my research into the financial irregularities that had consumed my thoughts for weeks. My computer access became increasingly restricted with each passing day. Files that I had worked on just weeks before now required supervisor approval to open. Basic spreadsheets that were once routine parts of my job responsibilities now generated error messages claiming I lacked sufficient clearance. The systematic removal of my digital permissions felt like watching my professional life being erased one click at a time. My keycard stopped working for the executive floors where senior management offices were located, and for the document storage rooms where historical client records were kept. When I mentioned this to Derek, he claimed it was part of a routine security update that would be resolved soon, but his explanation felt rehearsed and unconvincing. Other employees retained their access, making it clear that my restrictions were targeted and intentional. Colleagues began questioning my work ethic and competence in front of clients during meetings that I could not avoid attending. Sandra would interrupt my presentations to fact-check basic information that she knew was accurate, creating doubt about my reliability and professional judgment. Derek would assign me projects with unrealistic deadlines, then publicly criticize my inability to meet impossible expectations, building a documented record of supposed performance failures. The psychological pressure was devastating. Sandra started maintaining detailed written records of every minor mistake in my work, no matter how insignificant. A typo in an email subject line would generate a formal documentation note. A calculation that was 99% accurate, but contained a small rounding error, would result in a written warning about attention to detail. This paper trail was clearly being constructed for a specific purpose, and that purpose was my termination. My previous stellar performance reviews mysteriously disappeared from HR files when I requested copies to defend myself against the mounting criticisms. Patricia Vaughn, the HR director, claimed that computerized records from my first year of employment had been lost during a system upgrade, and paper backup copies could not be located. The erasure of my professional achievements felt like having my identity systematically deleted. Amanda Rogers. The new hire with minimal experience was given my former office space and responsibility for clients I had spent months learning to serve effectively. I was forced to train my own replacement while being kept unaware of management's intentions. The humiliation of teaching Amanda procedures I had developed, introducing her to clients who trusted my expertise, and watching her receive credit for my work was almost unbearable. During this training process, I discovered that someone had used my credentials to send fraudulent emails to regulatory authorities. These messages, apparently sent from my computer account, asked suspicious questions about auditing procedures and reporting requirements that would raise red flags about our company's compliance practices. The emails were crafted to make me appear as though I was preparing to whistleblow about legitimate business practices, not criminal activities. Security cameras revealed that my badge had been used to access the building during a weekend when I was visiting family in Nebraska. The timestamp showed someone entering with my credentials at 2 a.m. on Saturday, spending several hours in the office and leaving before dawn. This created documented evidence that I had been in the building during times when unauthorized transactions occurred, even though I was 400 miles away, helping my father repair storm damage to our barn. My personal laptop became infected with malware that linked to offshore banking sites I had never visited. When I took the computer to a repair shop, the technician found sophisticated software that had been monitoring my internet activity and storing information about financial websites. The malware was designed to create a digital footprint, suggesting I had been researching money laundering techniques and offshore account management, building a profile of criminal knowledge and intent. Marcus Thompson, my friend from college who worked in IT security for a different company, agreed to help me understand what was happening to my digital life. His analysis revealed that the malware had been installed remotely using administrative access to our company's network, indicating that someone with high-level technical privileges was involved in the frame-up operation. The sophistication of the attack suggested professional criminal organization involvement, not amateur attempts at evidence manipulation. Derek began planting falsified documents in my desk drawer for discovery, during what I now realized would be an upcoming search of my workspace. These documents included printed copies of the fraudulent offshore banking information, handwritten notes that mimicked my writing style, but contained incriminating financial calculations, and business cards for shell companies that existed only as part of the money laundering operation. The planted evidence was designed to support the narrative that I was the mastermind behind the criminal scheme. The personal toll of this campaign became overwhelming. I stopped sleeping through the night, waking up every few hours in cold sweats, checking my phone for new threatening messages or signs that my situation had deteriorated further. My appetite disappeared and I lost 15 pounds over the course of 6 weeks. Friends and family noticed the dramatic changes in my appearance and personality, asking questions I could not answer without revealing the dangerous situation I was trapped in. Tommy's surgery date was moved up due to complications from his injuries, and my family was counting on the financial help I had promised. The medical bills were mounting faster than originally projected, and delay in treatment was causing additional health problems that required even more expensive interventions. My mother's calls became more desperate as the farm foreclosure date approached, and she pleaded with me to find ways to access the money I had assured her I could provide. My stress manifested in panic attacks that struck without warning during normal workday activities. I would be sitting at my desk trying to focus on whatever meaningless task Derek had assigned when suddenly my heart would race, my hands would shake, and I would struggle to breathe normally. The combination of professional betrayal, family crisis, and criminal frame-up created levels of anxiety I had never experienced. But the worst revelation was still coming. While reviewing shared project files one last time before my access was completely revoked, I found hidden messages that Jake had left embedded in spreadsheet formulas and document metadata. These messages, written in code that only someone with financial analysis background would recognize, contained information that changed everything I thought I understood about my situation. Jake's hidden communications revealed that he was not the colleague I had thought he was. His background, his training, his entire identity at Meridian Financial was an elaborate cover story designed to support a long-term investigation into the money laundering operation. The federal government had been watching Derek and Sandra for months, gathering evidence of criminal activity that extended far beyond what I had discovered on my own. The final message from Jake was a warning his cover had been compromised and he would be disappearing soon. Sandra had found surveillance equipment hidden in his desk during a routine search for missing client files. The equipment was sophisticated enough to record conversations, monitor computer activity, and transmit information to external recipients without detection through normal office security measures. When I arrived early the next morning, Jake's desk was completely empty. Every personal item, every client file, every trace of his 18-month presence at Meridian Financial had been erased overnight. HR announced that he had accepted a sudden transfer opportunity, but refused to provide any details about his new location or contact information. The speed and thoroughness of his disappearance confirmed that my suspicions about his real identity were accurate. I realized that I was now completely alone in my knowledge of the criminal operation, facing professional destruction and potential federal prosecution, while the real criminals consolidated their power and prepared to sacrifice me as their scapegoat. The meeting that would determine my fate was scheduled for Friday morning, just 3 days away. Tuesday morning arrived with an ominous quiet that made every sound in the office seem amplified and threatening. Jake's desk remained empty, all personal items vanished as though he had never existed. His coffee mug, the small plant he had watered religiously, his collection of financial industry publications, even the desk nameplate that had read, Jake Phillips, Financial Analyst. Everything was gone. When I asked Sandra about his abrupt departure, she offered only a curt explanation about confidential personnel matters and suggested I focus on my own responsibilities. The HR department's official story about Jake's transfer opportunity satisfied no one who had worked with him regularly. Colleagues whispered questions about why someone would leave without saying goodbye to people he had collaborated with for over a year. The timing seemed suspicious, coming just days after Sandra had conducted unscheduled searches of employee workspaces, claiming she was looking for missing client files that had never actually been lost. Security measures throughout the building increased dramatically overnight. New cameras appeared in hallways where none had existed before. Mandatory bag checks were implemented for all employees entering or leaving the building. Access card requirements were expanded to include areas that had previously been open to general staff. The message was clear. Management suspected internal threats and was taking aggressive measures to identify potential security breaches. Derek and Sandra held emergency meetings with men I had never seen before, professionals in expensive suits who carried themselves with the authority of people accustomed to handling serious legal problems. These conversations took place behind closed doors in conference rooms, with blinds drawn, sometimes lasting for hours. When other employees asked about the identity of these visitors, they were told only that the company was conducting routine legal reviews of business practices and compliance procedures. My remaining computer access credentials expired without notice, stranding me from even the basic systems necessary to complete the simple tasks I had been assigned. When I reported this problem to IT support, they claimed no knowledge of any scheduled access changes and suggested I contact my supervisor for resolution. Derek was conveniently unavailable for several hours, and when I finally reached him, he promised to investigate the issue, but warned that resolving technical problems might take several days. Anonymous tips began appearing in my email account during this period of digital isolation. Someone was sending me account numbers, routing codes, and transaction details related to the offshore money laundering operation. These messages contained no explanation of their source or purpose, but they provided crucial information about how the criminal scheme operated and where the stolen money was being hidden. I realized that Jake must have arranged for this information to reach me before his cover was blown and he was forced to disappear. The additional evidence confirmed my worst fears about the scope and sophistication of the operation Derek and Sandra were running. Client trust fund money totaling $12 million had been systematically diverted to personal accounts over a period of 3 years. The scheme involved creating phantom investment opportunities that existed only on paper, collecting client money for these fake investments, and then moving the funds through a network of shell companies in countries with strict banking privacy laws. Jake's hidden messages revealed that the federal investigation had been ongoing for 8 months before my employment troubles began. FBI agents had been monitoring bank transactions, recording phone conversations, and building cases against multiple individuals involved in the money laundering network. However, something had gone wrong with their investigation, and Jake's warnings suggested that the operation had been compromised from within the federal law enforcement community itself. My research into Jake's background revealed inconsistencies that I should have noticed earlier if I had not been so focused on my own professional struggles. His employment history contained gaps that were explained vaguely. His educational credentials were from institutions that had no record of his attendance when I checked their alumni directories. His social media presence was limited and felt artificial, containing no personal details or long-term relationships that would be normal for someone his age. The realization that I had been working alongside an undercover federal agent for over a year was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it confirmed that law enforcement was aware of the criminal activities I had discovered. Terrifying because his sudden disappearance suggested that the investigation had encountered serious problems, possibly including the compromise of federal agents and the corruption of evidence that could have protected innocent people like me. Company executives clearly knew about federal scrutiny and were implementing aggressive measures to protect themselves. The emergency meetings with legal consultants, the increased security measures, the systematic destruction of documents that Sandra claimed was routine file purging, these actions indicated that Derek and Sandra understood they were under investigation and were preparing their defense strategy. That defense strategy apparently involved framing me as the mastermind behind the entire money laundering operation. Internal audits were scheduled for the following week, designed to discover evidence of my supposed criminal activities. Legal teams had been hired to build a comprehensive case demonstrating that I had orchestrated the theft of client funds, created the offshore account structure, and manipulated company records to conceal my crimes. Agent Sarah Chen, whom I contacted using information from Jake's hidden messages, initially seemed sympathetic to my situation. She confirmed that a federal investigation was ongoing, but explained that current evidence pointed to me as the primary suspect. Jake's reports, she claimed, had identified me as someone with the technical skills, access privileges, and financial motivation necessary to engineer the complex money laundering scheme. The conversation with Agent Chen left me more confused and frightened than before. If Jake was really an FBI agent investigating the same criminal operation I had discovered, why would his reports identify me as the mastermind? Either Jake had misunderstood my role in the company, or Agent Chen was not telling me the truth about the federal investigation's findings. The possibility that I was being deceived by law enforcement, as well as my colleagues, created a new level of paranoia and desperation. I had 72 hours before federal arrest warrants would be issued according to Agent Chen's timeline. During those 3 days, I needed to prove my innocence, while company executives destroyed evidence and strengthened their case against me. The task seemed impossible, especially since my computer access was restricted. My colleagues were actively undermining my credibility, and law enforcement agents apparently believed I was guilty of crimes I had actually been trying to expose. Tommy's medical emergency intensified during this crisis period. His condition deteriorated rapidly, requiring immediate surgery that could not be delayed any longer. The medical bills exceeded $100,000, and our family's insurance had reached its lifetime maximum coverage. My mother called me sobbing, begging me to find the money we desperately needed while I was simultaneously facing the possibility of federal prison and the complete destruction of my professional reputation. The farm foreclosure auction was scheduled for the following month, just weeks away. My father, a proud man who had worked the land for 40 years, was talking about moving to town and finding work as a store clerk or factory laborer. The thought of him losing everything he had built at his age, because I could not provide the financial help I had promised, was almost more devastating than my own professional crisis. My savings account was depleted from legal consultation fees and the costs of investigating my own situation. Former friends began avoiding my calls after hearing rumors about federal criminal charges. My landlord mentioned concerns about criminal investigations affecting his building's reputation. The social isolation was becoming as damaging as the financial pressure, leaving me without the emotional support system I needed to navigate the most difficult period of my life. But Jake's final hidden message contained information that changed everything I thought I understood about the investigation and the people involved. Agent Sarah Chen, the FBI contact who had seemed reluctant to help me, was not actually a federal law enforcement officer at all. Her real name was Sarah Morrison, and she was Derek's sister-in-law married to his older brother who lived in Minneapolis. This revelation meant that the federal investigation I had been told about was actually an elaborate deception designed to control my behavior and monitor my knowledge of the criminal operation. The real FBI investigation might exist, but Sarah Chen's role was to intercept communications from potential whistleblowers and feed information back to Derek and Sandra so they could stay ahead of actual law enforcement efforts. Jake's warning explained why his cover had been blown. Sarah Chen had been reporting his activities back to the very people he was investigating. The surveillance equipment found in his desk had been discovered not through routine security measures, but because Sarah Chen had told Sandra exactly where to look for it. The entire federal investigation had been compromised from the beginning by Derek's family connections within what I had believed was legitimate law enforcement. The termination meeting scheduled for Friday morning was not just about firing me for supposed performance problems. It was the final step in a comprehensive plan to frame me for money laundering, destroy my credibility as a potential witness, and eliminate the last person who understood enough about their operation to pose a serious threat. They intended to present fabricated evidence of my guilt, humiliate me publicly, and ensure that any future claims I made about their criminal activities would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a discredited former employee. I realized that I was completely on my own, facing enemies who controlled every institution I had thought might help me: company management, HR department, IT security, even federal law enforcement had been compromised by a criminal organization that was far more sophisticated and dangerous than I had initially understood. My only chance for survival was to gather enough evidence to expose the truth before they could complete their frame-up operation and destroy my life forever. The leather folder sitting on my desk contained everything I had been able to document about their crimes. In 72 hours, that folder would either save my life or become evidence in the criminal case they were building against me. Friday morning's meeting would determine not just my career, but my freedom, my family's future, and my ability to live without fear of retaliation from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their operation. At 3 in the morning on Wednesday, my phone rang with the harsh, metallic tone that jolts you awake from deep sleep. The voice on the other end was gravelly and unfamiliar, speaking slowly and deliberately. "Caroline Matthews, you need to disappear permanently, or we will provide a permanent solution for you." And the line went dead before I could respond, leaving me staring at the ceiling in my dark bedroom, heart pounding with the realization that I was now facing threats from people far more dangerous than corrupt colleagues. This was no longer just about workplace politics or corporate crime. I was caught in the middle of a war between federal investigators, company executives, and organized crime syndicates, with each side viewing me as either an asset to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated. The sophisticated nature of the money laundering operation, the federal investigation, and the corruption of law enforcement suggested that Derek and Sandra were working with criminal organizations that had resources and reached far beyond anything I had imagined. My apartment had been broken into sometime during the previous evening while I was at the office working late. Nothing was stolen, but the message was unmistakable. They could reach me anywhere, anytime, and my personal space offered no protection from their surveillance or retaliation. Furniture had been moved, slightly. Drawers had been searched and carefully repositioned, and my laptop showed signs of additional tampering. The violation of my home felt almost more threatening than the anonymous phone call. Derek's behavior became increasingly paranoid as external pressure mounted. He hired private security guards who accompanied him to and from the office building. His daily routines changed unpredictably, with meetings rescheduled at the last minute, and travel routes varied to avoid potential surveillance. The man who had once projected complete confidence and control now jumped at unexpected sounds and constantly checked his phone for threatening messages. Sandra accelerated her destruction of physical documents, working late into the evening to shred client files, transaction records, and correspondence that might connect the company to illegal activities. She claimed this was routine file purging, required by document retention policies, but the volume and urgency of her efforts suggested panic rather than standard administrative housekeeping. Entire filing cabinets were emptied, and industrial shredding services were hired to handle the massive amount of paper being destroyed. The company announced my immediate termination, effective Friday morning, citing performance issues that required no further discussion or appeal process. HR Director Patricia Vaughn scheduled the termination meeting with unusual formality, including written notices sent to my home address and requirements that I bring identification, building access cards, and company property for return. The elaborate procedures suggested they were preparing for legal challenges and wanted documented proof that proper termination protocols had been followed. My final investigation efforts revealed the full scope of the criminal enterprise that had been operating under the cover of legitimate financial services. Derek's personal bank accounts contained over $2 million that had been systematically stolen from client trust funds over a 3-year period. Sandra had been running a parallel embezzlement scheme, skimming additional money for personal use, while helping Derek manage the larger money laundering operation for external criminal clients. The client list included several known criminal enterprises throughout the Midwest, organizations involved in drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and other activities that generated large amounts of cash, requiring sophisticated laundering services. Meridian Financial served as a clearinghouse for multiple criminal operations, providing a veneer of legitimate business activity while processing millions of dollars in illegal proceeds through offshore accounts and shell companies. Marcus Thompson's technical analysis revealed that the company's computer systems had been compromised by professional hackers working for the criminal organization. These hackers had installed sophisticated software that allowed them to monitor employee activities, manipulate financial records, and create false digital evidence that could be used to frame innocent people for crimes committed by others. The level of technical sophistication suggested that this was not an isolated operation, but part of a larger criminal network with resources comparable to those of major corporations. The fabricated evidence against me was extensive and professionally crafted. Bank records had been created showing large unexplained deposits in accounts opened using my stolen identity. Witnesses had been prepared to testify about my supposed lavish lifestyle and suspicious behavior during the period when client funds were being stolen. Legal documents were ready for filing, demanding restitution of millions of dollars supposedly stolen by me from client accounts. My former college friends began distancing themselves after receiving anonymous tips about my supposed criminal activity. Professional contacts stopped returning my phone calls after seeing fabricated news articles about the rogue analyst who had betrayed client trust and stolen money intended for retirement accounts and charitable foundations. The systematic destruction of my reputation was designed to ensure that any future claims I made about Derek and Sandra's crimes would be dismissed as desperate attempts by a convicted criminal to shift blame to innocent colleagues. Family members received threatening phone calls, warning them to cut contact with me or face consequences for associating with a federal criminal. My mother was told that helping me financially or emotionally would be considered obstruction of justice and could result in charges against her and my father. Tommy's medical team was contacted by someone claiming to be from law enforcement, warning them that his surgery expenses might be paid with stolen money if they accepted financial help from me. The pressure campaign was designed to isolate me completely from any source of support or assistance. My landlord served an eviction notice based on criminal investigation, affecting the building's reputation with other tenants. Credit card companies canceled my accounts pending federal investigation. My bank froze my checking and savings accounts, claiming they were responding to law enforcement requests for information about suspicious financial activity. I was effectively trapped, unable to work, unable to access my own money, unable to help my family during their medical and financial crisis, and facing federal criminal charges based on fabricated evidence that I lacked the resources to challenge effectively. The psychological torture of watching my life being systematically destroyed while the real criminals operated freely was almost unbearable. But I still had the leather folder containing evidence that could expose the truth about who was really stealing money from clients and running the money laundering operation. My forensic analysis skills, attention to detail, and months of careful investigation had created a comprehensive record of their crimes that would be difficult to explain away or discredit entirely. Derek scheduled Friday's termination meeting with elaborate formality, designed for maximum humiliation. The conference room would be filled with senior staff, HR representatives, company attorneys, crisis management consultants, and private investigators hired to build the case against me. Media contacts had been tipped off to be outside the building during my perp walk, ensuring that my public disgrace would be photographed and reported as evidence of corporate vigilance against employee theft. They expected me to cry, beg for mercy, or break down emotionally under the pressure they had been building for months. They had seen me as a vulnerable young woman who could be easily manipulated and destroyed when she became inconvenient for their operation. Their plan was to present their fabricated evidence, terminate my employment with public humiliation, and hand me over to corrupted law enforcement officials who would complete my destruction through the federal criminal justice system. But I had spent months preparing for this confrontation. Every document in my leather folder had been verified and cross-referenced. Every piece of evidence had been analyzed from multiple angles to ensure it would withstand scrutiny from defense attorneys and federal prosecutors. My case was stronger than they realized, and my determination to protect my family and clear my name was more powerful than their campaign of intimidation and deception. Thursday evening, I made my final preparations for Friday's meeting. I contacted the real FBI field office using information that Marcus had helped me verify through independent sources. Agent Jennifer Walsh, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience in financial crimes, listened to my story and agreed to have agents positioned outside the building during Friday's meeting. Unlike the corrupted agent Sarah Chen, Agent Walsh was part of a federal task force that had been investigating organized crime influence in Chicago's financial sector for over 2 years. My hidden recording device provided by Agent Walsh would capture every word spoken during Friday's termination meeting. Derek's confessions about criminal activities, Sandra's admissions of evidence destruction, and any other incriminating statements would be transmitted live to federal agents who had the authority and integrity to act on the evidence they received. I also prepared copies of my evidence folder for distribution to legitimate journalists, regulatory agencies, and law enforcement officials who could not be controlled or corrupted by Derek's criminal organization. Even if something happened to me during Friday's confrontation, the truth about their crimes would not die with my silence. Friday morning would bring either my complete destruction or my vindication and revenge. They had underestimated my intelligence, my courage, and my determination to fight back against people who thought they could destroy innocent lives without consequences. The meeting they had planned as my humiliation would become their exposure and downfall. Friday morning arrived with the gray, overcast sky that often accompanies Chicago's most significant moments. I entered Meridian Financial knowing this would be my final day as an employee, carrying the worn leather folder that contained everything I had discovered about Derek and Sandra's criminal operation. My hands remained steady despite the magnitude of what was about to happen, and my voice carried confidence that surprised even me when I greeted the security guards who would soon witness my colleague's downfall. The conference room was filled exactly as I had expected. Derek Morrison sat at the head of the table, wearing his most expensive suit, projecting an authority he would lose within the hour. Sandra Kellerman arranged documents with the meticulous care of someone who believed she was orchestrating my professional execution. HR Director Patricia Vaughn reviewed prepared remarks that would soon become evidence in federal criminal cases. Company attorneys, crisis management consultants, and private investigators crowded around the table, all confident they were about to witness the successful conclusion of months of careful planning. Derek's opening remarks painted me as a security threat who had betrayed company trust and client confidence for personal financial gain. He spoke with the practiced delivery of someone who had rehearsed these accusations, describing my supposed transformation from promising analyst to criminal mastermind who had exploited my access to client accounts for systematic theft. His voice carried moral authority that would have been convincing if the audience had not known the truth about his own crimes. Sandra presented the fabricated evidence they had spent months creating falsified bank statements, showing large, unexplained deposits, forged documents bearing my digital signature, authorizing unauthorized transfers, and testimony from coached witnesses, describing my supposed lavish spending during the period when client money was being stolen. Her presentation was professionally polished with visual aids and detailed timelines that demonstrated significant preparation and investment in my destruction. Patricia Vaughn read from a prepared termination letter that cited gross misconduct, violation of fiduciary duties, and potential criminal liability as grounds for immediate dismissal without severance pay or benefits continuation. The language was carefully crafted to support future legal actions and ensure that my employment record would permanently reflect criminal activity rather than performance issues or personality conflicts. I remained silent throughout their presentations, taking careful notes and observing the reactions of everyone present. My calm demeanor clearly unsettled Derek, who had expected emotional breakdown or desperate attempts to defend myself against their accusations. Instead, I sat quietly, occasionally nodding, as though I found their evidence interesting rather than threatening, while the recording device transmitted every word to federal agents positioned outside the building. The attorneys explained the civil lawsuit seeking full restitution of supposedly stolen funds, plus punitive damages that would exceed anything I could ever hope to repay. They described the criminal referral being made to federal prosecutors, the cooperation agreement between the company and law enforcement agencies, and the overwhelming evidence that would ensure my conviction on money laundering and fraud charges. Their confidence was absolute, built on months of preparation that they believed had anticipated every possible defense I might attempt. Security guards positioned themselves to prevent me from accessing computers or files when the meeting concluded. Their instructions were clear: I would be escorted from the building immediately after termination, allowed to collect only personal items from my desk, and banned permanently from company property. Media representatives had been alerted to photograph my removal, ensuring that my public humiliation would be documented and distributed as evidence of corporate vigilance against employee crimes. When they finished their presentations, I stood quietly and unpacked my leather folder with deliberate calm that seemed to puzzle everyone present. The room fell completely silent as I placed a single manila envelope on the conference table, then began explaining that I had been documenting their criminal activities for months while they were building their case against me. My voice carried the authority of someone presenting facts rather than making desperate accusations. I revealed my knowledge of the offshore accounts, shell companies, and criminal organization connections that generated millions of dollars in illegal proceeds for Derek and Sandra. The specificity of my information clearly shocked them. Account numbers they thought were secret transaction dates they believed were untraceable, and client names they assumed I had never heard. Their confident expressions transformed into confusion and growing alarm as they realized I possessed detailed evidence of their crimes. Derek's personal theft of over $2 million from crime syndicate money, Sandra's parallel embezzlement scheme, skimming additional funds for personal use, and their systematic manipulation of client accounts to conceal the money laundering operation were all documented with forensic precision in my evidence folder. I explained how their weekend transfers, phantom transactions, and falsified records created patterns that revealed the sophisticated criminal enterprise operating under cover of legitimate financial services. The revelation about Agent Sarah Chen's true identity and family connection to Derek created visible panic in several people around the table. I explained how their corruption of the federal investigation had compromised Jake Phillips's undercover operation and endangered legitimate law enforcement efforts to expose organized crime influence in Chicago's financial sector. The attorneys recognized immediately that conspiracy to obstruct federal investigations carried severe criminal penalties that would be added to the money laundering and fraud charges they already faced. Sandra's face turned ashen when I described the evidence destruction she had been conducting under cover of routine file maintenance. Federal prosecution guidelines treat destruction of evidence during active investigations as separate criminal charges, and her systematic shredding of documents would be viewed as consciousness of guilt that juries find particularly compelling. The crisis management consultants began taking notes about damage control strategies, recognizing that their clients faced catastrophic legal exposure. I presented proof of my innocence using original security footage that showed my absence from the building during times when my credentials were supposedly used for unauthorized transactions. The digital forensics evidence prepared by Marcus demonstrated that sophisticated malware had been used to compromise my computer systems and forge my electronic signatures without my knowledge or participation. My documentation of threats, intimidation, and evidence planting would support federal charges of witness tampering and conspiracy. The tables had turned completely. Derek's confident smirk disappeared as he realized that his elaborate frame-up operation was being exposed in front of witnesses who could testify about his confessions and admissions. Company attorneys understood that their clients faced not only criminal prosecution, but civil liability to defrauded clients whose money had been stolen, and to me as a victim of systematic harassment and false accusations. Security guards received new instructions as power dynamics shifted dramatically in the conference room. Instead of escorting me from the building, they would soon be providing protection for federal agents who would be arriving to arrest Derek, Sandra, and other conspirators whose criminal activities were being documented in real time through my hidden recording device. I saved the most devastating revelation for last. Removing the recording device from my jacket pocket, I explained that every word spoken during the meeting had been transmitted live to FBI agent Jennifer Walsh and the federal task force investigating organized crime connections in Chicago's financial sector. Derek's detailed confessions about the criminal organization, Sandra's admissions of evidence destruction, and Patricia Vaughn's participation in the cover-up conspiracy were all being recorded for use in federal criminal prosecutions. The sound of police sirens approaching the building confirmed that federal agents had heard enough evidence to justify immediate arrests. Derek's carefully planned termination meeting had become his confession session. Sandra's evidence presentation had documented her own crimes, and their conspiracy to frame me had been exposed to law enforcement officials with the authority and integrity to pursue justice against organized crime operations. As FBI agents entered the conference room with arrest warrants and evidence collection equipment, I realized that 18 months of systematic harassment, professional destruction, and personal intimidation were finally ending. The people who had called me a parasite and tried to destroy my life for their own criminal purposes were about to face the consequences of underestimating someone with the courage, intelligence, and determination to fight back against corruption and injustice. The conference room erupted into controlled chaos as FBI agent Jennifer Walsh led a team of federal agents through the doors, displaying badges and arrest warrants with the calm authority that comes from years of experience with white-collar criminals who believe themselves untouchable. Derek Morrison, who had been confidently orchestrating my humiliation just minutes before, now sat frozen as Agent Walsh read him his rights for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy charges that carried potential sentences of 25 years in federal prison. Sandra Kellerman's transformation was even more dramatic. The woman who had systematically destroyed my professional reputation while embezzling client funds for her personal luxury spending now struggled to understand how her carefully planned destruction of evidence had become documented proof of consciousness of guilt. As handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she kept repeating that she had only been following Derek's instructions, apparently believing that cooperation in criminal conspiracy would somehow reduce her culpability. HR Director Patricia Vaughn faced charges of obstruction of justice for her role in destroying employee records and fabricating performance evaluations to support the frame-up operation. The meticulous documentation she had maintained to justify my termination now served as evidence of systematic harassment designed to silence a potential witness to federal crimes. Her shocked expression suggested she had never considered that helping conceal criminal activity might make her a criminal herself. Agent Sarah Chen, whose real name was Sarah Morrison, and whose family connection to Derek had corrupted the entire federal investigation, was arrested for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to interfere with federal law enforcement operations. Her abuse of authority and betrayal of public trust represented exactly the type of corruption that undermines citizen confidence in law enforcement institutions, and federal prosecutors would pursue her case aggressively to demonstrate that badge holders are not above the law. The arrests were swift and efficient, with each defendant separated immediately to prevent coordination of stories or destruction of additional evidence. Federal agents had been monitoring the building for hours, ensuring that no documents were removed and no communications were sent to warn other members of the criminal organization. The element of surprise was complete, and the evidence gathered during my months of investigation provided roadmaps for additional arrests and asset seizure operations. Within hours, 12 additional indictments were announced against members of the organized crime syndicate that had been using Meridian Financial for money laundering operations. The client list I had discovered included drug traffickers, illegal gambling operators, and other criminal enterprises that had trusted Derek and Sandra to hide their illegal proceeds from law enforcement scrutiny. The collapse of the money laundering network would disrupt criminal activities throughout the Midwest. Federal asset seizure operations began immediately freezing bank accounts and seizing property purchased with stolen client money. Derek's luxury condominium, expensive automobiles, and offshore investments were all subject to forfeiture proceedings that would return stolen funds to defrauded clients. Sandra's designer clothing collection, jewelry, and vacation properties would be liquidated to provide restitution for the pension funds and charitable organizations whose money she had stolen. The FBI's public statement clearing my name and commending my courage in exposing the criminal operation transformed media coverage overnight. The same journalists who had been prepared to photograph my humiliating termination now reported on my role as a whistleblower whose investigation had prevented millions of additional dollars from being stolen from innocent clients. My reputation in Chicago's financial community was not only restored, but enhanced by recognition of my integrity and analytical skills. Jake Phillips emerged from federal witness protection to provide testimony that connected the Meridian Financial operation to a larger criminal network spanning multiple states. His undercover work had been compromised by Sarah Chen's family loyalty to Derek, but the evidence I had independently gathered filled critical gaps in the federal case and provided corroboration for his testimony about the sophistication and scope of the money laundering enterprise. The Whistleblower Protection Program provided both financial compensation for my cooperation and security measures to prevent retaliation from criminal organization members who might blame me for disrupting their operations. The reward of $400,000 from the Federal Asset Forfeiture Program represented not only recognition of my contribution to the investigation, but also the financial resources I needed to help my family during their crisis. Tommy's surgery was completed successfully, using funds from the whistleblower reward, and his recovery exceeded medical expectations due to the high-quality care we could now afford. The relief in his voice when he called to thank me was worth more than any professional recognition I could have received. Knowing that my courage in fighting back against corruption had saved my brother's health and mobility gave meaning to months of harassment and intimidation. The family farm was saved from foreclosure when I used reward money to pay off the mortgage in full, shocking my parents, who had resigned themselves to losing land that had been in our family for 4 generations. My father cried when I handed him the canceled mortgage documents, and my mother's gratitude reminded me why fighting for justice always requires personal sacrifice but ultimately protects the people we love most. Multiple job offers poured in from prestigious firms seeking my expertise in forensic financial analysis and my demonstrated ability to identify complex fraud schemes. I chose a position with the Securities and Exchange Commission, investigating white-collar crime drawn by the opportunity to protect other employees from corporate corruption and help prevent innocent investors from losing their retirement savings to sophisticated criminals. My new role with the SEC provided a salary increase of 60%, reflecting both my specialized knowledge and proven integrity under pressure. More importantly, the work gave me purpose beyond personal advancement. Every case I investigated represented families like mine who depended on financial institutions to protect their savings, and every criminal I helped expose meant fewer victims of corporate greed and organized crime. The personal growth I experienced during months of fighting for my survival taught me lessons that no business school could provide. I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, even when everyone around me insisted I was imagining problems. I discovered inner strength I never knew existed, finding courage to stand up to powerful people who tried to destroy me for their own criminal purposes. Most importantly, I learned that integrity cannot be compromised for personal gain, no matter how desperate the circumstances become. When Derek and Sandra offered to include me in their criminal operation early in my investigation, promising financial rewards that would have solved my family's problems immediately, I chose the harder path of exposing their crimes despite the personal costs. That decision ultimately saved not only my own reputation, but countless other victims who would have been defrauded if their operation had continued. The final chapter of this story took place 6 months later when I visited Meridian Financial's former headquarters for the last time. Federal seizure notices covered the building's entrance, and the offices where I had worked stood empty except for evidence collection equipment. The space that had once buzzed with financial activity now served as a reminder that criminal organizations eventually face justice, no matter how sophisticated their operations or how powerful their connections. Standing in my former workspace, I felt closure knowing that justice had been served and other potential victims were protected from Derek and Sandra's criminal enterprise. The months of harassment, intimidation, and professional destruction had ended with the vindication I fought for and the protection of innocent people who trusted financial institutions with their life savings. Sometimes being called a parasite by corrupt people means you are actually the antibody fighting infection. My willingness to risk everything for truth and justice not only cleared my name, but prevented countless families from losing money they had worked lifetimes to save. The courage to stand up to powerful criminals who abuse their positions for personal gain ultimately protects society from those who would exploit trust and authority for criminal purposes. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where doing the right thing required risking everything you had worked for? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories of courage and integrity remind us all that standing up for justice, even when it is difficult and dangerous, is what protects our communities from those who would exploit and harm innocent people. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting content that exposes the truth about corporate corruption and organized crime. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to my channel for more stories about justice and courage, and share this with others who believe that integrity and truth will ultimately prevail over corruption and deception. Together, we can create communities where honesty is rewarded and criminals face consequences for their actions.